Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell movement.
Welcome to the Powell movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and well, I have some news to share, and it's not happy, but I will tell you. Since I now know what's going on and we have an idea of what the plan is, Ange and I are in much better spirits. We're not partying or anything, as the cancer is back. It's spread a little. They call this stage 4. Scary, but it's isolated, and the doctor believes that a big surgery to remove things and another round of chemo is in our sights. But we can't be sure about what the treatment will consist of, as we're waiting on some new test results next week. I've pretty much shared my whole life with this podcast as it's been happening over the years, over the past 7 years. And I did it with round 1 of Cancer with Ange, and I'm going to continue to do it. But if it's annoying, or if it bothers you, or if it bums you out, it's too sad or whatever, please email me at mike@thepowellmovement.com and let me know how you feel. I know you're not trying to hurt my feelings by saying, hey, I don't want you to talk about it. But if it is upsetting, let me know, and I won't touch on it as much as I had last time around. I will say that while I've taken life for granted for so long, this past week has made me realize that I really need to cherish each day that I have happy and healthy, because in this fucked up world we live in, you never know when things are going to change. I thought we were out of the woods, and now we were right back in the shit, and it's fucking scary. I mean, thinking about death for real is so heavy and sad. And while we had those terrible thoughts last week, now that we have a plan, we've accepted our reality, and now the goal is to live through this again. My guest this week wasn't so lucky, which means I really don't have a guest this week. It's a memorial episode, and it's about one of my favorite athletes and people of all time, Ben Weis. You may remember Ben from the podcast I did with him. While I think everyone should listen to episode 142, the summary is, it's a podcast about a kid who grows up without a dad in a loose household. He's one of those kids with a once-in-a-lifetime magnetic personality who everyone wanted to either be around or at least wanted to see what he was going to do next. I've only known one person like that in life other than Ben, and that's Shane McConkey. And while Shane seemed to do everything other than his sports in a legal manner, in the recordings I did for this podcast, I found that that wasn't true for Ben. I also realized that I was so naive back in my team management days. So through these interviews, I learned that the Ben I knew and loved did so much shit that I had no idea about, and it was all bad. So that makes this podcast a little different. The stories you'll hear are from Ben's best friends, fellow pro skaters, his wife, and they really do help explain who Ben really was, not just the version that I knew him as. And I almost forgot. I'm doing this podcast because unfortunately, Ben Weis died in May. He had gotten himself clean and sober, he was living with his beautiful wife, and in true Ben Weis fashion, he jumped on a pocket bike wearing no helmet, was having some fun, and ended up being hit by a car and dying. Personally, and to so many skaters and his loved ones, this was a huge loss. And to tell you the truth, I'm not 100% sure I want to put this podcast out. Ben is dead, and I don't want to shit on his legacy, but the more I think about it, I really believe Ben would want me to put a podcast out about him and some of his wild stories, before all the really bad shit happened. And I believe this because Ben was all about one more time, one more trick, one more anything, as long as it involved him being the center of attention. And in that one more try spirit, this is one more podcast for Ben. One last time to have him in the center of my world. I truly love that guy, and I think about him all the time. Before I get into his podcast, I'm not going to tell you to review me wherever you listen to me. I'm not going to ask you to tell a friend about the show, as it does help the show grow. What I am going to do is I'm going to ask you to support my amazing sponsors who make this thing happen. I am really excited to have Outdoor Research back on sponsoring the podcast. They've been sponsoring me for years, and they're a local Seattle company whose ad you're going to hear within the podcast. I've been wearing their stuff as it is the best outerwear you're going to find. And when you see the new cuts and fits, you are going to be stoked. I know I was, but I'll talk about that in their ad. My other sponsors that I want you to support are Stanley, Elon Skis, Rollerblade, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, and Best Day Brewing. Now I'm going to read a few words from Ben's older brother, Jordan, who gave me the blessing to go ahead and move forward with this podcast. My brother Ben was not the same Ben you knew all those years ago. And I know he wasn't perfect. I'm not pretending he was. Our father abandoned his wife and 4 sons in Casper, Wyoming. Ben was still in diapers and was spared the daily 0 to high order violence that was inflicted on him. Our mother raised Ben differently than us older 3. We all moved away and Ben found a family in skating. He loved his skating family and life. He was my mother's sweetest and funniest son. everyone's favorite uncle and mom's favorite. When I was with Ben, I laughed until I cried. Please know that the Ben at the end wasn't the true Ben. Well, those are some words from Jordan, and I will say we're not going to really talk about the Ben at the end, because he did have some issues later on in life. We're really going to talk about mainly his skating career. And we're going to start out in the beginning, and really when you hear about that, Ben had 3 brothers, and he was almost treated like an only child. If you met him, you would have thought he was an only child. But like Jordan said, when Ben found skating, that's really when he found his family. All his real brothers were inline skaters, and that's who he really identified with. And his whole life was about inline skating until it wasn't, unfortunately. And we're going to kick this thing off with one of those skating brothers, absolute legend, Eric Schrijn. He's going to talk a little bit about Ben's energy before we get into some of the stories.
Dude, he's Ben. He has that energy of, I don't know what astrology, like what sign he is. I fucking forgot, but I don't know if you're into it or whatever, but his energy was just so bright. He was such a bright person, and he had to be there, man. He had to let you know that you saw Ben that day, whether it be good or bad, dude. Yeah, dude, Ben was good people.
He wasn't just good people. He was a great skater, and that started pretty much from the get-go. Once he got his first pair of blades, he started killing it right away. Let's hear what Ben had to say about his early contest days.
A lot of companies started dumping money and writing off taxes with these skate events, like Target Market was a huge one. They were an anti-smoking corporation. They dumped a lot into skating. So those weekly local and regional skating events, I made my living off of those, because I'll be honest with you, man, this is going to sound really bad and cocky, but I don't remember fucking losing ever.
During those early contests, Ben was competing against the French brothers a whole lot. Mike and Derek French, some well-known skaters from the Midwest who were at pretty much every contest that Ben was at. And you hear Ben say that he pretty much never lost a contest. Well, I asked Derek French about that, and here's what Derek had to say. Ben would tell me this all the time, that he would go to contests, you and your brother would be there, and everybody would be pissed off when he showed up because he was the best and he was going to win, and you and your brother were like second or third. Is that true, or is that just Ben talking shit?
Well, so, we were always a little more reserved than Ben. Ben, he held nothing back.
Even as a kid?
From day one, it was all or nothing, And it always came down to that one more try, And I think maybe that's where we got a lot of that fire from. But all of us, we were going for the jugular all the time. And, I'm going to be honest, we didn't have that same confidence he did. And we cared a little bit more about style. He didn't care if it was chucker. He was going to front side or he was going to soul something insane. Ben was all about being on the edge completely.
Like Derek said, a lot of the things that Ben was doing was on the edge. They were all death-defying stunts. And with Ben, he would always look to the judges if it was one of those big judge competitions, or to whoever he needed to look to if it was a street battle, and he would always want one more try. His death-defying stunt, he was never going to land first try, and he was going to try as many times as he possibly could until the event organizer said, there are no more tries, Ben. You are done. And Eric Schrijn and I talk about Ben Weis's one more try mentality.
Not one more time, because that, like in the skate culture, was like, you're going to die, dude. You never say one more time. You kind of freak it. You know what I mean? You say another time. Not one more time, but, let's give it a couple more goes, because I don't know why, but just that saying that is cursed.
And that's cursed in everything. But with Ben, you can see it on the internet everywhere. He was always one more, just one more, just one more. And like, whether it was a big contest that was on TV or a street battle, people just be like, no. And he's just like, just give me one more. I got it. Just one more. And that one more always turned into 14 more.
Yeah. But you know what, though? Honestly, the first couple times he did that, it worked. And I think he understood I'm going to get kind of deep right now, like the whole power of the universe of where it's, if you say one more time, you're pretty much cursing yourself. But Ben, he knew how confident he was and how good he was, and he threw that down every time, like, one more time, like, fuck you, universe, fuck you, like, look at me now, I'm going to do this. And the first couple times he did that shit. He raced it at a couple contests, and then it stuck. That was like his signature, because it worked a couple times. That shit happened.
So that was Eric Schrijn's take on One More Try. Based on Derek French being at every contest that Ben was at when they were both younger, Derek is very familiar with Ben's one more try mentality, and Derek has his thoughts on it. When you say one more time, can you explain that for people who might not know? And
Absolutely. Ben was one more time or one more trick Weiss. And you remember at every competition, you would get that, okay, you get one more try. Ben invented this. He was that guy that was like, one more, just one more. And he would be doing something death-defying and would be putting his life on the line for that trick. And he didn't care who was watching, what kind of time constraints they had for this competition. Ben wanted one more shot at whatever he was doing until he landed it. And so that every rollerblader, I think, who's been in the game long enough knows what it's like to just need one more try, because it's never just one try. It's a part of blading, You fall 42 times, you get up 43.
Next up, I talked to John Murakami, a fellow Midwestern skater who turned pro with Ben in 2000 at the ASA World Championships in Las Vegas, when Ben beat arguably two of the best skaters in the history of inline skating, Brian Aragon and Alex Brosco, to become the amateur champion in 2000. And I asked John about how Ben always wanted one more try, and here's what John had to say about Ben and first meeting Ben and a whole bunch more.
He was definitely that, the Ben Weis Show. He always wanted the highlights, and he would always go out to get them.
What's your first impression when you first meet Ben Weis? Because he's a whole lot of personality, and what did you experience when you first met him? What do you remember?
Center of attention, the way he liked it. And I always found it funny because he was a mousy little dude, but he certainly backed it up with skating, and you could tell he would do just about anything. He had a little bit of Steve-O in him, just a little wily and always down for attention and to go out and get that attention.
And do you have a story, or do you remember the most attention-getting moment that Ben had around you where you're just like, Jesus Christ, I can't believe he's doing it again? Do you remember that moment?
Oh, there's so many of them. When we turned pro, I was tied for second with Brosco and Aragon. But of course, Weiss had to jump up on the tent and then drop in from the tent into the 20-foot rolling. So he had to make a spectacle out of it.
While Ben had to make a spectacle of his tricks at contests, and really with just about everything that he did in his life, Ben was also super inclusive. He was always welcoming people and always bringing them into his world. And the next guy I'm going to bring up, I'm going to call him John. Once Ben turned about 18 years old, John was one of Ben's best friends. And given I am changing John's name to keep his anonymity because he doesn't want to lose his wife or his job or anything, and I don't think he will with what I'm putting in the podcast, but we're going to talk about the first time John and Ben met.
I was a real small town guy, and me and a BMX kid moved to Mankato. I lived in a really small farm town in Iowa, and me and this guy decided we're going to try to get really good and just get part-time jobs and hang out at the skate park in Mankato. And on the first day I went there, I ran into Ben and all those guys, and I'd never seen people skate like that. I was like, holy crap. And they were like, come kick it with us. You're in the crew now. And the next night I brought a handle of Captain Morgan and a 12-pack of Dr. Pepper. And Ben goes, I'll drive us to the house. We're going to have a huge party. We get in his car, and he drives through all of these garbage cans and breaks his windshield, in the place where he lives. Yeah. And basically I moved in with him within days. They just squeezed me in, and it was just party after party after party, going to Minneapolis skating all the time with the Frenches.
So John and Ben hit it off pretty much instantaneously. And Ben moved him into the house, which I found out later on was called the Crack House. And I think it had a different name as well, which we'll get into when we go into this next conversation. I was able to talk to a guy named Shorty Adam K. Now, I met Adam K on the road with Ben. He would travel with Ben. I think Ben would buy him plane tickets, or he would just bring him along whenever he could. And Shorty Adam K was Ben's right-hand man. He did everything for Ben. If Ben needed food, it seemed like Shorty Adam K went out and got it. It was kind of part entourage, part wingman, part just awesome guy. And I got to see Adam K all the time. He was around for 3 or 4 years when Ben was on K2. And Adam had this to say about where Ben lived. So I've talked with who was pretty amazing. He had some great stories. I mean, all these stories are bad. So that's the one thing I should ask you about is it's going to not paint Ben in a bad light, but like he did a lot of bad shit, and that was just part of him. So I almost feel bad putting it out after his death, but the whole podcast, he told all the shit anyway. It wasn't like he shied away from it. So one thing that's super unique about Ben Weis is that he is able to convince people to do things that they might not want to do in order to kind of have a good time. And that's kind of what it was all about, or to accomplish whatever goal Ben was about. But he was going to include you and make it fun. And you, Shorty Adam K, were his right-hand man on a lot of different things. And there was a story that you were telling about how Ben created a party out of nothing. Can you take us through that?
So they had just moved from the crack house downtown to...
So he called his house the crack house. Why?
Oh, my God. If you saw that house, they didn't ever get a bill in the mail for months. And so they just didn't think that they had to pay them for some reason. And so at some point, both the electricity and the gas were shut off. And so they were using candles at night, and the candles burned one of the curtains one night and almost started the whole house on fire. It looked like a crack house. I mean, it was like 40s everywhere, broken windows. The cops came in one time. I forget what they came in for, but they saw the big broken window in back, and they're like, wait, did somebody come in that way? And we're like, oh, no, that's been broken for a long time. There was 4 apartments in the building. And it was basically skaters in every apartment, multiple people. And it was just a house party for years. I don't think it ever stopped.
And it wasn't just a house party for years. It was like Ben's whole life was a party for years, and everybody around him who he invited was lucky enough to celebrate with him. Although all those other people had other things going on in their lives, where Ben was focused on inline skating and partying, and that was about it back then. But one thing Ben was able to do, which you kind of got from my earlier question to Shorty Adam K, was Ben was able to manufacture a party or anything out of nothing. And if he didn't have anything going on, he was the kind of dude who could manipulate a situation to create more fun for everyone. And here's Adam K talking about starting parties.
So, yeah, they moved to the suburbs. Some guy was getting divorced or something and had to basically move out of his huge suburban house and put it on the market for rent really cheap, really quickly. And they just happened to see it advertised somewhere, and they were like, dude, let's jump on that. And so they moved out to the suburbs, and it was like crazy cheap.
I visited him at that house where he had a big yard and everything.
Yeah, it was very abnormal for any of our friends to have such a nice house, especially these friends. So then we were hanging out, and it was just me and him. And very often it was me and him in the day or in the morning or whatever, just hanging out, sitting around, doing whatever. And we were literally just playing video games, and the phone rings, and he's like, no, we're having a party. Yeah, there's like, grab a case and come over. And then he hung up, and he's like, oh, yeah, they're going to come over in a bit. And then the phone rang again 10 minutes later. No, dude, there's a bunch of people. We're having a party. Grab a case and come over. And it was just me and him sitting in the basement. I'm like, whatever. And that was just him. He could tell that story. And so it happened maybe 3 or 4 times. The phone just kept ringing, and that's what he was telling people. And sure enough, within an hour, people showed up with cases of beer, and we had a party. And that's how it was every day, all the time.
It's time for my first sponsor break, and Seattle's own Outdoor Research has been supporting this podcast for almost 5 seasons. But you know what? I've been wearing their gear long before they bought ads, because they make hands down the warmest and most waterproof gear I've ever purchased. And you know what? There's something to be said for going out into the elements knowing that you're going to be drier and warmer than everyone else because you're rocking gear made with the best materials that were tested in the brutal elements of the Pacific Northwest. I mean, for decades, OR has been the one-stop shop for mountaineers climbing 7,000-meter peaks, because those life-or-death situations should always be outfitted with the best gear. But that's only a small part of what they do. Over the past few seasons, OR designers have been working with OR ambassadors like backcountry skier Mark Abma, U.S. Free Ski team members Troy Podmilsack and Zoe Aiken, and snowboarder Neil Provo to create new baggier fits and styles that turn heads and have people saying, whoa, is that an Outdoor Research jacket? This season, I'll be rocking the freeride fit of the Snow Crew and Norak. And on the colder days, you'll find me in the lightly insulated Tungsten 2. I'm dialed in for this season with outerwear, and now it's your turn. To find the best for you, head on over to outdoorresearch.com and see the new website with all the new products on it. Next up, it's Peter Glenn Ski and Sports. And while we're at the end of summer, it's still really, really hot. And that means it's time to get in the water. And Peter Glenn is the one-stop shop for all of your needs. Think wakeboard, water ski, kneeboard, tubes, swimwear. They have everything to make your summer more fun and functional. And they're a Rollerblade brand dealer, so you can take care of your inline needs as well. Peter Glenn has all the brands, all the products, a knowledgeable staff to help you, and a best-in-class website if you can't make it to their stores. But that's not all. They also have a low price guarantee, free shipping on orders of $50 or more, and a hassle-free return policy, which is very important. Peter Glenn isn't one of those big guys trying to take over an industry. They're the mom and pop shop that you've trusted for almost 70 years. If you like this podcast and want it to keep going, please buy from Peter Glenn Ski and Sports. To find out more, head on over to peterglenn.com. My final sponsor this round is Stanley, the iconic Northwest brand that invented the category of keeping things hot and cold over 100 years ago. You remember Stanley from your grandfather's green thermos that kept his coffee hot forever when he took you out on adventures. Well, Stanley still makes that bottle and so much more. Think tumblers, water bottles, barware, camping utensils, coolers, vacuum bottles. There really is something for everyone over at Stanley, and you aren't going to find them overpriced like a lot of copycat designer brands that have popped up recently. Stanley is the originator, and they pride themselves on providing you with the best products at the best value. And that value gets even better when you shop with my discount code. When you head on over to stanley1913.com, go shopping. When you check out, enter the code winteriscoming, that's all one word, all lowercase, and you're going to get 30% off your entire order. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. Ben will always be remembered as the Ben Weis Show. He was always about hijacking a contest to do the most insane trick and getting all the attention and the spotlight put on him. Some people hated it, to tell you the truth, because it took away from the rest of the event. But it was also death-defying, and it was one of those things that you had to have your eyes on because you had to see what was happening. And years back when Ben and I podcasted, I talked with him about that best trick mentality. If there's a final, there's 5 dudes who've skated all day to get in the final. Ben Weis is going to steal the attention from the final for his stunt. And he's going to get his trick, and it might take him 30 times. You never land anything first try.
Oh, never.
Especially that big shit.
Yeah.
But it's like the 15th try is when you really get the juice. You got your hands up. You're looking for that adulation from the crowd.
Man. Yeah, that's true. That couldn't have been said better. That's actually transitioned into making fun of myself doing street stunts. Just like what you're talking about, death-defying stunts. You could get killed doing some of the shit that I tried when I was a youngster. And there might be one camera and one person watching. And believe it or not, me and that one person would connect and hype each other up and scream and pound our chests and rip our shirts off. And it didn't matter how many people were watching. It was all in my head.
What's wild is it was all in his head, but in this next part, Ben justifies why he was able to not really worry about the contest and only focus on the best trick and just pleasing the crowd and showing pretty much everyone else how big his balls were, that he was not afraid to try the biggest stunt in whatever venue we were at. And I found this pretty interesting, that it was all about money. If he had his rent covered, he did not care. He was going to send it. He really was a true performer and entertainer.
It wasn't that way until I knew I was going to have my rent covered regardless. When I didn't have my rent guaranteed was when I took the contest part very seriously, and I did make it through and skate a lot of finals and get paid on the normal contest part. But man, when it was relaxed to the point where it was like, you know what, man, my paycheck's coming next month. I don't give a fuck. I'm doing this. This is the biggest thing that's ever been constructed. And I'm going to try it because I'm never going to get the opportunity to ever do this again. Because it's never going to be this weather, this people, this constructed obstacle. And a lot of the times, I didn't even skate the obstacle. It was more like the bleachers attached to the obstacle or the roof or the rafters over the obstacle. You know what I mean? It just, everything seemed to come together for that one moment in time where it was just like, I'm going to fucking huck it.
So best trick for Ben was all about doing it when he had rent covered. And with Ben, I knew he didn't make that much money. I was his team manager at K2 and I knew what we paid him, and it wasn't a living wage by any means. When you're an athlete like Ben was, you need to have a bunch of different sponsors to pay your bills. Ben was pretty much happy having all of his money come from K2, and it didn't seem like he tried to get other sponsors. He just wanted to call me and try to get me to do things for him. and a lot of times I did. But one thing I never really realized was how Ben got money. Given, now that I'm doing this podcast, I realize that there was other income streams that I may not be aware of. But back then, I'd never really knew Ben to work. So when I was talking to Adam K, I asked Adam if Ben ever had a job, and he shined some light on me that Ben actually did work. Ben never really did he ever really have a job when you knew him other than stuff that people didn't know about?
I was just walking home and I was thinking, I bet people don't know that he had a day job. He literally did. He was a carpet cleaner. Him and Chad and Mike Silva sometimes and a couple of the others that lived there, they were carpet cleaners. They would drive around in a van, and it was run by their landlord at the crack house, and they would work for him. I only went with them once or twice just to hang out, and like they loved to, after they cleaned the carpet, everyone would just, lie down on this nice clean carpet. It was kind of nice. There's so many things that are just normal about him, and that's why there's so much craziness. It was really just a wild time. You ask if he had a job. He had a girlfriend pretty much the entire time I knew him. I think he was with 2 different girls the whole time I knew him.
And super nice, and he could charm parents. I mean, Ben was an awesome guy. I mean, a lot of the stories that come out make it seem like he was this dark underworld figure, but he was just like a regular dude with just a ton of personality that everybody wanted to be around.
So there's 2 sides to that story, as he just said. So he had 2 girlfriends the whole time I knew him. He was also with over 100 girls in the time I knew him. He could charm anyone. He did charm everyone. Yeah, parents loved him. Girls loved him. Everyone wanted to be with him. Everyone wanted to be near him. It was really the life of the party all the time.
Well, we got sidetracked there a little bit talking about Ben being the life of the party, which he was. But what we were talking about was Best Trick, Ben Weis, or the Ben Weis Show. And the way Ben carried himself, it was evident to everyone. I mean, if you met Ben on day one, you would realize that he needed this attention. And I sent Ben and Eric Schrijn over to England once to do a demo tour, and they hooked up with Loco Skates owner Jake Eley. Now, Jake has been a longtime pro out of England, and he's got his own shop, and he's a little bit more than just a skater. He's a businessman as well. But he was able to show Ben around England, and here is what he took away from Ben about his best trick mentality from just meeting him for 5 days. You guys figured that out within a week, that Ben was always going to be the center of attention in the life of the party and probably hijacking contests with his stunts.
Yeah, and the thing is as well, I mean, that kind of went hand in hand with the skating as well, because, the way he skated kind of reflected his personality, because he was, the center of attention when he was skating as well, because he was always doing the biggest thing, the most impressive thing. This is something I remember. I remember Eric doing switch true fish brains. And it being like, man, switch true fish brain. But then, as tech as that is, then Ben went and jumped off the top of a ramp over a fence or something and, 20 feet in the air or whatever it was. And everyone kind of remembered what Ben did. So that was kind of reflected in his skating every time he skated, and he had a kind of get it done mentality, I suppose. I guess that's reflected in a lot of skaters of that era. At that point when there was more hammers happening and everyone was out to impress, I suppose everyone was really hungry, weren't they? People were younger.
Yeah.
So Ben was hungry, and yeah, he had this let's get it done mentality. It wasn't like you would go on a session with Ben and come away from the session and go, oh, nothing really happened today, didn't really get any footage. Every single time there would be a big trick that happened, something to talk about. That's the other thing as well, is this, turn up to a local spots in another country, see the thing that everyone's been eyeing up for years beforehand and hasn't actually done, that everyone's talked about, hey, do you reckon someone might be able to, gap out of that ramp and over that fence? And then actually, just first time turning up, just, getting it done. No questions asked. I remember we went out and had a kind of roof grind to gap that I'd been looking at for a while. Yeah, something, for months I've been like, I reckon maybe I could do it, I'm not sure. And obviously Ben just got up there and just did it straight away. So yeah, no fucking about with Ben, for sure.
So that was the Ben Weis Show from England. Eric Schrijn was on that trip, and while we don't talk about being on that trip with Eric, he has his own Ben Weis Show story to share.
There was a few, Blade Cup in particular. He did one that was, I'm sure a bunch of people will mention it maybe. He climbed up into a tree, right? And he got pretty up there. The tree just happened to be hovering above a quarter pipe. It was kind of dodgy and whatnot, but it was the end of the fucking best trick contest, and fucking everyone was over it. But then everyone's like, "Wait, look, Ben's in a tree," and it's like, "Oh shit!" And Ben's like just up there, like all squatted in like a cannonball position, and just ready to go. And everyone's just like, "All right, dude, fuck it, one more time, Ben." And he just did it, and he landed it. He like landed it like halfway with his leg like skidding, but he landed it, and I remember that. But clearly I remember going on tour with Ben and having like mini demos, and then yeah, when we were on the road with him and whatnot, like he was always about that, like, "Oh dude, just check me out, clear the path, I'm about to disaster that." It's like, "Oh Ben, fuck dude, like everyone's just trying to skate." Here's Ben just fucking throwing himself human cannonball, but he would land it, you know what I mean? He would always lace it and everyone would be stoked, and it was the Ben Weis Show, and fucking many a times he did that on the road. And his personality, dude, got us through some crazy shit, like when we were on the road out in Europe.
Eric was right. Ben was full of personality, and that personality could make just about anything happen. He had that rare ability to convince anyone to do almost anything, even when they knew it wasn't right or smart. I mean, the dude could have been the most incredible salesman ever if he put his mind to it. And I thought this soundbite from his good buddy John could sum that up a little bit.
We would work, and then Ben would help me get an excuse on how I can leave a job for a week. So one day, me and Ben decided that we're going to tell this job that I worked at that I couldn't go to work because I'm diabetic and I'm getting insulin. So when I got back from this skate trip in Detroit, which one of the other guys will probably tell you that story. That was a whole nother story. We like dined and dashed all the way out to Detroit. I can't remember what comp it was. But anyways, I had to fake going in the bathroom and poke my finger like I was diabetic so I wouldn't lose this job, and eventually got busted. Yeah, but what Ben really taught me, like, I was pretty social to go up to girls and stuff, but he taught me talk to every single hot chick, go up to a pack of them. They're nothing. We are everything. Like, he would walk up to a whole crew of hot chicks and go, "Did one of you girls fart?" And I'm just like, "How could you say that?" And then he'd be hooking up with 3 of the 5 by the end of the night,
Yeah.
But he would always show up late to parties and stuff, like at his own house. He would disappear. And I'm like, "Dude, why are you late? Everybody's here." And he kind of taught me that it's cool to show up late because that way everybody can watch you walk in. And I was like, "Oh, that's so baller." I thought that was so cool. And then it's not about where it's at, where the party's at, where everybody's at. It's where I'm at, and I kind of carried that through. And that really helped me with like confidence at 19 years old. And I'm like, all I do is shoot the shit with people all day long. And I thank him every day for that because I'm not afraid to talk to anybody. We have every can imagine that in my Rolodex that, I take care of when they come to town, and it's just no big deal, and a lot of that is from Ben. I mean, that guy, he could just talk to anybody.
So Ben was able to convince friends to lie to employers and say they were diabetic, which is absolutely crazy and totally not right. But that kind of a situation was just something that would happen to Ben on a Tuesday. He had crazy shit going on in his life all the time. And while it wasn't always right, it was so Ben, and he was always so unpredictable. Here is one of those wild stories from pro skater John Murakami.
Yeah, the one that sums it up, at least for me, is we're waiting on Ben, like, outside of his studio. And Ben being Ben, he probably just got out of the shower and is probably dancing to, like, Flashdance or, like, Footloose or something.
Yeah.
And we're just waiting outside for, like, 15, 20 minutes. And then he comes outside slinging a 30-year-old vacuum over his shoulder. We're just sitting there just like, "What in the hell are you doing?"
Yeah.
Like, "We gotta go." And he's just like, "We just need to stop by the mall real quick." Of course, Weiss, he will throw a fit if he doesn't get his way. So we just went to the mall. He goes in. 10 minutes later, he comes out with like a brand new Warwick. None of us understand, but of course, that's just Ben. And then we go skating. Weiss wrote down on a napkin, again, kind of like Jackass, a roof-to-roof grind on his back porch that was like elevated. And then just one day he's just like, "You coming over?" I'm just like, "What do you mean?" He's just like, "Oh, we're doing that roof-to-roof grind. I built a rail from like one roof to another. The news is coming and we're having a 40 party." So he bought like 3 cases of 40s and we're all just hanging out waiting to watch Ben try and skate a rail from roof to roof.
And I've seen those pictures, and that's the funny thing about Ben is like he would bring a whole bunch of illegal stuff, probably underage kids and a ton of booze to this thing. But then he'd also call the news because he's like, well, we got to show everybody this. It's going to be fucking awesome.
Oh, yeah. He gave no fucks. He just went for it.
John couldn't have said it any better. Ben gave no fucks. And while he was doing a lot of things to feed his own ego, I think that Ben secretly told himself that he was really doing things for everyone else, and he really believed that. Everything was about him traveling, showing off his skating, or showing off his crazy wardrobe, or his mini bikes, or his tricked out cars. Ben was a total baller on a budget, and to the naked eye, it looked like he had everything. But when you looked into the details, you could see that he was just so clever in the way that he was able to spin everything. A little bit of smoke and mirrors, a little bit of Ben Weis. He could have been a hell of a marketer too. He could have been so many things, as he was so personable, and he had an impact and left some lessons on almost everyone he met, whether they be positive or negative. You could hear that from his old buddy John talking about the things that he learned from Ben, and so many people learned from Ben because his network was so huge. And that was because he always had to be going somewhere. He would organize these loose road trips, and wherever he was, he would meet everyone, cause some trouble, and here is one of those road trip stories from his buddy Adam K.
I've been out with him, and I don't know if I told you about the road trip we took to Okoboji, Iowa for 4th of July. And we were driving, and halfway there, the freaking van blows the motor. And we're on the side of the highway, just the three of us. And so we had to hitchhike with this semi-truck driver, and he brought us to the gas station. And is from Iowa, so he had some friends come pick us up. And we got down to Okoboji, and I think the first thing we did was go to a bar. And we're like happy as hell. I was 21, Ben was 20, but he had a fake ID, and I think was 21. And Ben's talking to somebody, and they must have known him somehow, and they weren't happy with him. And they told the bouncer that he wasn't 21, and the bouncer didn't even bother to kick him out, just called the police. And the police came and arrested him right out of the bar. And so we had to go and pick him up from jail the next day, and he was still wearing stripes. Like, I've never seen anyone wear stripes but Ben, literally.
Like jail stripes like you'd see in a movie?
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah, and so we picked him up from jail the next morning. It was just hilarious for us, but, you know, he was amazing. Whenever the cops would show up when he was skating in high schools or wherever, you know, finding a rail somewhere, and the cops would show up and try and kick everyone out, and he's like, would you rather have us go do drugs? Because we could.
It's time for my second sponsor break, and I'm going to start things off with Elon Skis. I started telling you about Elon building a cult following in the States about 3 years ago. And if you're like me and heading to the mountain on a weekly basis, I know you've been seeing more Elons by the day. Why? Because they'll make you a better skier. The product that Elon puts into the market is second to none. I mean, Elon's a company that also makes luxury yachts, so you know they're not going to cut corners on materials or production. They're built in Elon's proprietary factory, one of the most sustainable in the world, and the difference in quality is noticeable. Walk up to any ski wall and compare the craftsmanship of an Elon ski to the rest, and there's a difference that you will see and feel. But when you get them on the snow, that's where Elon really shines. From my ripstick models to my new favorite twin tip, the Playmaker, Elon keeps making better and more fun skis every year. If you want to have more fun on the mountain next year, head on over to elonskis.com and find the pair that's best for you. My next sponsor is Rollerblade, the brand that invented inline skates. Rollerblade has been keeping skiers in shape since 1980. If you've listened to this podcast and my interviews with US ski teamers, all of them use Rollerblade branded skates to get where they are today. It's the only all-season sport that mimics the motion of skiing and utilizes the same muscle groups. So really, it's a no-brainer that if you want to get better on your skis, in the park or at speed or anywhere really, inline skating is going to make you better. Remember, running wrecks your knees, and biking is proven not to get your legs in ski shape. If you want to start ski season like you left off last year, download yourself Rollerblade's award-winning Skate to Ski app, pick yourself up a pair of skates, and get to work. You can thank me in early December when you're surprised your ski legs are that strong. To find out more about all things Rollerblade, head on over to rollerblade.com. My final sponsor is Best Day Brewing. And I'll tell you, I've been loving having Best Day as a sponsor, as it's really helped me change my ways. See, I'm a binge drinker. Well, I don't drink that often. When I do, I put a bunch back. And my issue is that, like with everything, I drink way too fast, and within a couple of hours, I need to go home because the alcohol has gotten the best of me. But not anymore. Now I'm managing my fun time by making sure that every other beer I drink a Best Day. And by doing that, I've been having my best days and nights ever. I can stay out longer, I'm coherent, happy, and I don't feel like crap in the morning. And they taste so good. I'll put a Best Day Hazy IPA up against any alcoholic IPA in a blind taste test, and you won't be able to tell which is which. On top of that, Best Days are only like 60 calories, which, like drinking less alcohol, is something that I think about these days. While I'm not asking you to quit drinking by any means, please support me and your health by heading over to bestdaybrewing.com and order a six-pack or two. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. So Ben loved road trips, and this next story is about what happened on an Iowa road trip. And I'll tell you, one thing I had no idea about when it came to Ben Weis was what he had fun doing before he was 21. It sounded like he was a huge fan of going to bars underage. Who isn't? But when you get caught by the bouncers and you're under 21, it's usually time to go home. But Ben didn't play by the rules. And John shed some light on how wild he could get when the bouncers told him he had to go home.
Yeah, so we'd always get into the bars when we weren't 21. And then we'd end up getting busted and the bouncers would come kick us out. Well, that would never be a smooth process. Ben would always like draw a line in the dirt and be like, we're going to fuck these guys up. And they were always gigantic guys that were like 5-6 years older than us. But whatever, we'd give it a shot. Ben would swing on them and then they'd hold us down or something. But yeah, one time I brought him down to Iowa. And we were leaving the bar and same thing, we get kicked out. Ben's underage. He squares up on a bouncer, or it turned out to be like an undercover cop or something. Ben swings on him, gets arrested. We have to go pick him up the next morning. We were like protesting out front. It was really, really stupid. But there was one time where we were in Mankato and he brings all these bouncers outside. And basically they decided they're not going to fight us. And there were some other guys in the bar that like, oh, we're going to kick this guy's ass. And I was already like a block ahead of Ben. I'm like, dude, let's go. And I look back and I'm already like running towards Ben. Ben takes this gigantic swing at this guy that's like a foot taller than him and misses because Ben's got all these accessories on, necklaces, rings, hats, sunglasses, tall boots, unlaced and shit.
Yeah, always.
But he misses this guy, spins around, and this guy's trying to get a hold of him and finally holds Ben down. He draws back, and I mean, he is so far back, ready to punch him. And I come in just the nick of time and just smoke this guy, lay this guy out. I don't even know if I knocked him out or anything. And then I grab Ben, and Ben's still fighting the guy, even though he doesn't know what's going on. And I go, Ben, we got to get the hell out of here. And he stands up and finally, because he's hammered too. And he's like, we got to go. I'm like, yeah, we got to go. And basically take off running with like half the bar chasing us. And then we end up running back into our own party and it's packed. And then the crowd goes wild. And then we just party all night again. Yeah, lots of like fighting bouncers at bars. And he could not fight at all, which is kind of funny.
Over the years, I'm guessing Ben got better at fighting because he started getting into shit that was much more high consequence compared to his skating. And Ben's skating was always high consequence. Here's Ben explaining how he was so good at being so bad.
And that literally transitioned into everything I did. And then when I learned how to do bad shit that I don't really want to get into too much because I'm really trying to move past it. But when I was a bad person, I was a really bad person.
The first time that I realized Ben had major issues with drugs and selling them and people wanting to hurt him was after the barn burner contest in Seattle in 2003. Ben was in town for the comp, and when it was time for me to take him to the airport, he started crying to me saying, Mike, I can't go home. If I do, people are going to kill me. And I was like, dude, you came and stayed at my house when people are after you? Are you fucking crazy? Sorry, dude. I'm going to take you to the airport. This is tough love. You have to go home and face the music. You cannot do it from my house. It was a hard thing to do, but I took him to the airport. And here's what his good friend John had to say about that time and Ben facing the music.
They had like a street park set up at the Minnesota State Fair. Like Atmosphere was playing. It was insane. Well, I was trying to do a backflip while like putting my helmet under my leg and then putting it back on my head.
Yep.
And we were like taking a bunch of Vicodin. So if we got hurt, we could keep going. And I just stalled out upside down and broke my hip. And I got up and I kept going and did the trick. And like as the night went on, my hip kept swelling and swelling. So anyways, I ended up in a wheelchair and had to like move back home. And then 9/11 happened. And then it wasn't long after that, I went back to Mankato. Everybody was kind of doing the same thing. And I ran into some buddies, and me, Ben Gavin, Matt Wardlow, a bunch of players moved to Copper Mountain, Colorado.
Okay.
We were all like, oh, we're going to be pro snowboarders. I was nowhere near as any of the other guys were. But after 1 year being in Colorado, Ben convinced me to go back to Austin, Minnesota. He posted back up in his hometown. And I'd been away for a year. And that's when I was like, oh shit, this guy's like moving a bunch of weed. I don't think anything else was in the picture. I think it might have been, but I wasn't aware of it, even though I was living with him. But yeah, I hung with him for a couple of months, and he was getting his skate park in Austin. Like, he had this skate park going.
Yeah, it was like the Stop or something like that.
No, this is before that. I can't remember what he called it. But anyways, yeah, I mean, it was a big indoor skate park. It was gigantic, and it was dead. Like, nobody was going there. But I was helping him run that. Well, one day he's like, yo, can you drive me up to Minneapolis in his car? And I'm like, yeah, sure. What's it about? And he's like, oh, it's just something I got to handle. And I'm like, all right. And I hadn't seen anything shady going on. So I drive up, and we are in, like, might I remind you, I'm from a town of 800 people. Like, I saw quite a bit of stuff in Mankato. I mean, a lot of beer, a lot of ecstasy, a lot of drinking, but never like blow or anything like that. So we get up to the shittiest part of Minneapolis, and he's like, park right here. I'll be right back. And I was even sketched to park the car there. And he goes up to the front door of this house, and I'm parked like 3 doors down, which I knew he had planned. And he goes up to the door, and these guys just grab him and start beating the shit out of him. And I'm like, what the fuck? And I get out of the car, and he's like, just stay back, stay back. And I'm like, all right. Then he runs back to the car, and he's like, go, go, go. And I'm like, what the fuck, man? And then he's like, no, stop. And all these guys surround the car, and he's like, don't do anything. And I'm like, okay. And he rolls down the window, and they get a couple more punches in on him. Come to find out, he owed them a lot of money, and he was going up there to tell them that he didn't have the money. So basically, I'd never seen Ben upset in my life. He was always Mr. Confident, and he just had his head down like all the way home and kind of filled me in. And I'm like, dude, why would you drag me up into that shit?
So Ben took his beating, and that's part of an underground set of rules or code that I know nothing about. And since I podcasted with Ben after that, he was able to shed some light on that and how you carry yourself in life and in prison so you can walk down the street without having to look over your shoulder.
It just sucked because when it came crashing down hard. And when it came crashing down, I kept my fucking mouth shut. And that's part of the reason why I can still walk around and not look over my shoulder. And, you know, the feeling of your first fight in a prison setting wasn't a first fight at all. I was sitting in the chow hall, and I was getting stared at by this kid for the whole time we're eating. For the whole time, dude, this kid just will not stop staring at me. And then they call for us to get up and go drop off our trays and shit. And then the kid comes up to me, and I'm ready to fuck him up. And literally, he's like, you're Ben Weis. And I'm like, what? And he goes, dude, I'm from Mankato, Minnesota, dude. And I'm like, oh my God, fuck, dude. I thought you were going to fucking... And so me and him became cool. In fact, I made it all through prison without a fight because my personality, making people laugh, getting along. I had the nickname Hollywood probably at 2 different prisons. And I didn't get into any prison fights until county jail. I did a 3-month county jail stint down in Florida, and I got in 3 fights down there. For some reason, they were with giant 300-pound black dudes that just thought they could punk me out. Yeah, I got my ass beat, but since I stood up for myself, we became friends, and that was the end of it.
You know, with this podcast, I'm trying to highlight who Ben was, without talking about all the real bad shit that went down after I knew him. But there was a lot of bad shit that happened with a lot of his friends. But you know what? At the end of the day, everyone talks about how much fun they had with Ben Weis. And that needs to be called out. Ben was very aware of that, and here's what he had to say about it.
You know, every time I've talked to an ex-girlfriend or a friend from the past or something who you would think that, like, we'd parted on bad terms, they always say, like, man, I never had as much fun ever again as when I was with you. And that always felt like a compliment because it's never where you're at, it's who you're with. You know what I mean?
And every person I spoke with about Ben was on the same page. Life was so fun and unpredictable when he was around. And even in his dark times, when Ben would reconnect with old friends, they would come away feeling like he was still having the time of his life. And when I saw him, when he was clean and sober in Denver, while he looked a little bit different than the Weis I knew, he still had that Ben Weis energy. Here's what Adam K had to say about that.
Every time I talked to him, he always sounded like he was having an awesome life. Even this year I talked to him, He's like, oh yeah, dude, I just got a new truck. Oh man, I'm doing this thing. Oh, I made $100,000 off this thing, whatever. And it's like, all right, man, awesome. He's so happy, so much life, so much energy. Never stopped.
When Ben's good friend John connected with Ben right around the pandemic time, John's life had changed for the better and he was doing really well. Ben found out what John was up to and Ben wanted to join. So here's another anecdote from John that just tells a little bit more about Ben Weis.
Yeah, I had heard from Ben over the years, and I heard not long ago, it must have been right around COVID, that he was in rough shape. And I talked to him and I told him yeah, I just bought a house and all this shit. He kept trying to convince me to move him out to and that he was a painter and that he could paint my new house. And if I just bought him and 3 other people a plane ticket to come out. And literally that was one of the first times I said no to Ben. He could talk anybody out of $1,000. Oh man, some guy gave me a car. Ben talked this guy into giving me a car one time. It was out of control.
My next call was by far my toughest and most uncomfortable call I've had in my podcast life. I mentioned to Ben's wife, Taylir, that if she felt up to it, I would love to have her on to say a few words about Ben. I told her I knew this would be difficult, but she was up for talking about Ben. I could have asked so many things that may not have caused tears, but I didn't really think before I spoke, and I asked some heavy stuff that brought out all the emotions. Taylir, I'm so sorry about your loss, and I wish I would have asked different questions, but thank you for the unfiltered look at yours and Ben's relationship. I know you truly loved each other. So how did you guys meet?
It was Thanksgiving. It was hard.
I know, I'm sorry.
It was Thanksgiving Day, and I was with my family over at a family friend's house having dinner. I had literally just moved back to Colorado, and I decided I wanted to leave and go hang out with some of the kids that I grew up with in this babysitting co-op. Our parents were all broke, so they would trade time cards instead of money. And it worked out really well for everybody and made some lifelong friends through that. And I had one of my good friends, Patrick, was working at a bar, the Irish Hound, which is where we had our wedding reception at. He was working there, and he said Nico was there and Peter was there and come on down. And I said, all right, let me do that. And this was right over in Cherry Creek. It was a few blocks from where Ben was living at the time, which ended up being our first house together. But I went down there and I was hanging out with Patrick and Peter and Nico, and we're having a great time. And I run into this girl, Kelly Jenkins, that I haven't seen in forever. And she used to be one of our great friends. She used to be part of the crew. And apparently she was on a date with Ben, which was kind of funny. Ben was there with another one of his friends. Oh, what's his name? Calls him Lefty. I think his name is Mike.
Okay.
He was there with Lefty, his girlfriend Steffi, and then Steffi was friends with Kelly. And they thought they'd bring Kelly along and introduce Kelly to Ben, and that, they would be great together. But Kelly's probably one of the most, how do I put it nicely? She's just very yuppie, proper.
A normie, per se?
Yeah, totally. There you go. And anyway, I'm trying to talk to Kelly. I haven't seen her in a long time. And Ben had just won at Blading Cup. That was the year that he had jumped out of the tree.
Yep.
And he had just won, and he was so excited about winning. And Kelly and I are sitting down and we're talking, and he keeps coming over and he keeps interrupting us, and we keep telling him to go away. We're like, go away, man. Like, who are you? Like, I don't know you. I don't care about Blading Cup. I've never liked bladers. And so finally he gets to the point, I'm like, okay, tell us your story really quick so I can actually get back to talking to my friend. And he tells us his story and his wild story and shows us the video. And I was actually really impressed. I thought, wow, that actually looks amazing. That sounds amazing. That looks like a lot of fun. And definitely he was a lot more fun than Kelly. So I said, let's go to the bar. Let's get a shot. And we did. We went up to the bar. We got a few shots. And then I convinced everybody that we should go to Shotguns. Shotguns here in Colorado is a strip club, probably one of the nicer ones. It's a place that I used to work at and absolutely love going to. So convinced everybody that we were going to go to Shotguns. So we all went to Shotguns. Debbie, the owner of Shotguns, was there. They have a fire pole that goes from the upstairs dressing room down onto the stage. Ben somehow convinces Debbie to let him go up into the dressing room, which was just wild. Get on the fire pole, slide down. He slides down face first onto the stage, and there's just girls throwing money at him left and right. Kelly at this point is on the bathroom floor puking her brains out. And I thought that would be a really good time to ask for his phone number. So I did. I asked for his phone number. I waited 3 days. We made plans and we went out that night. We went to a little place on South Broadway called Historians. I think we drank a whole bottle of tequila and I don't think we left each other's side for the next 3 weeks. It was it. We knew.
And then from there, you guys end up getting married pretty quickly, I feel like, from the time that you meet at that bar to getting married. But I feel like the proposal story is pretty batshit crazy as well. Can you tell us how he proposed to you?
And that's a fun one, too. Yeah. We went down to Powwow in Florida.
Contest,
yeah. He asked me to go with him. He was driving. I was flying. He decided to stop and pick up a bouncy house on his way. This was going to be where we were going to sleep.
Only Ben.
Only Ben. Oh, yes. And we literally were bouncing off the walls. That was a really fun one. My girlfriend drove up from Pensacola to come meet us. And, I was so grateful I had one of my girlfriends there because Ben, he's just so much energy and, he's so magnetic and everybody wanted to be around him. And I would have been lost without Nicole. But we had an amazing time. He put up these wild lights and, it was perfect. Everybody was stopping by, jumping in the bounce house. We had front row seats to the whole show. It was great. And the contest ended. I flew home, and apparently on his drive back, he called my dad and asked my dad permission to marry me. And my dad said yes. So when he got home, he got down on his knee and proposed to me. I knew he was my soulmate.
So based on my last podcast with Ben, I thought there was going to be an even crazier proposal story. He told it last time he was on with me, and that's what I was digging for. But unfortunately, I struck a nerve and really upset Taylir, which I knew was going to happen at some point. So I'm sorry about that, Taylir. My final question for her was about Ben's legacy, and here's what she had to say.
Ben would want to be remembered as everybody's friend. He loved you guys so much. And he loved his friends so much. And he would want to be remembered as your friend. He would want to be remembered as the person that you had a blast with. The person that you could go to. The guy that would give you the shirt off his back.
And that shirt would have been a leather Gucci shirt with chains adorned to it and all different types of things, because that's how Ben was.
Oh, you know it. You know it.
So that wasn't easy, but everything Taylir says at the end of this podcast reinforces exactly what all Ben's closest friends had to say about him. He loved his friends. And while I didn't want to include any heavy drug use stories in this podcast, Derek French told me an important story about how Ben helped him get over a fear that I'd rather not bring up, but this is Derek's story. And before we get to the outro, here's the story around Ben helping Derek get over his fears.
Hey, I got one more thing and this is very important to me.
Okay.
But I wanted to tell you about the first time. So I am in recovery now, but When we were teenagers, the first time I took mushrooms, Ben convinced somebody to drive me out to Mankato so I could meet the crew. And little Mark from Willow, the movie, the kid who finds Willow at the river.
The real kid.
Yeah, was the star. He was the biggest star in Mankato. I was on my way to go out there and meet him, and unfortunately I had taken mushrooms, and little people at the time were one of my biggest fears, but I didn't meet one yet. And so I was on my way to meet little Mark. He was part of the crew. And so Ben thought the best way for me to meet him would be, and he knew I was on mushrooms, would be on Halloween to have him hide in the closet dressed in a diaper as he was a baby for Halloween. And he had him hide in the closet. So when I walked in, made my grand entrance, I'm looking around, and I knew I just needed to extend my hand out and say, "Hey, I'm Derek. Nice to meet you." And I'm looking for him and he's nowhere around. Mike's got this smile from ear to ear, and Ben, he just can't wait. And so as soon as they had Mark bust out of the closet, he came running at me with his arms in the air, and he looked like he had 8-foot arms because, I was hallucinating. And they didn't stop laughing for about 45 minutes, but Ben thought that would be the best way for me to overcome my fear. That was probably one of my best stories with Ben because it was the first time I actually overcame a real fear, was because of Ben's genius,
So that was time chatting about the late Ben Weis, a great friend of mine, an incredible skater, husband, brother, and all-around good times guy. I miss Ben, which is why I put the words Ben Weis tribute on my calendar a while ago. But when I got to the desk this week and I saw that it was tribute week, I started stressing. I had no real plan for this one. I didn't have a backup guest, and the way my life has been playing out lately, I had to move forward with this one. And I had to do a good job because I loved Ben. And I put a lot of time into this one, and it's a totally different episode. I still have to go back through and listen to it to see if I actually like it. But, like it or not, I'm putting it out. So please let me know what you think about this episode. If you like it or dislike it, you can email me at mike@thepowellmovement.com and let me know. If you have any questions or concerns or guest suggestions, that's also the place to send those. Finally, I want to thank all of you for listening and ask you to please check out my incredible sponsors. I only work with the best, and they are Outdoor Research, Stanley, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Elon Skis, Rollerblade, and Best Day Brewing. Have a great week, everyone.